this podcast, we will be looking at storytellers, stories, and the reasons that oral storytelling is important in our world today. You would think with all the technology we have available that stories do not have a place anymore, but they are needed more than ever. For in storytelling is where we find truth, we find reality, and we find the heart of what it is to be human. Welcome to the heart of storytelling. My name is Alyssa Curtain, and let's go on an adventure.
Welcome to this week's episode. This week I speak with Laura Packer, who is in the United States. This is a wide-ranging interview that goes from her beginnings as a child to cultural appropriation to corporate work and so much more in between. There's a lot of richness in this interview, and I hope that you enjoy this interview with Laura. I will say that there is a content warning if you are triggered by talking of suicide or self-harm. I hope you enjoy the interview. Welcome to this week's episode. This week we're speaking with Laura Packer, who is in Minneapolis in the United States. Welcome to the podcast.
Alyssa, I'm so glad to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, you're most welcome. So I'd love to hear about your journey into storytelling. Tell me about how you started and where you've been and what you're doing.
Oh, what a great big question. I love that. So I am the daughter of a children's librarian and a writer. So when I was growing up, I actually heard a lot of stories long after most kids stop hearing them. And they were told to me. They weren't just read to me. My parents certainly read to me, but Mom would tell me the folk tales that she was working on learning to tell to the kids in her library. And Dad would tell me stories from his childhood and from the radio plays that he listened to when he was a boy. I then started telling these stories to my friends. So at 6, 7, 8, at sleepovers, my friends would ask me to tell them stories. So I started reading more and more fairy tales. I started reading lots of spooky stories so I could tell them creepy stuff. You know, kids really love creepy stories. So by the time I was 9 or 10 years old at sleepovers, everyone knew that I would tell them a story if they asked. I went to college and pursued a degree in folklore and mythology. And while I was in college, I met a man named Brother Blue, who was a street storyteller, along with many other kinds of storytelling. In the U.S., he's one of the instrumental storytellers in the revival of storytelling here in the United States. But I heard him performing on the street, and I sat down on the cold concrete, and I listened to him tell King Lear as if it were jazz, and as if he had heard William Shakespeare himself tell that story. And I was transfixed. So I kept following Blue around and trying to hear him tell stories. And when I was 19, I found out that he was teaching a class at a local adult education center. So I went and I told a story. I was really scared. And he got very close to me and he said, "You have the power." And I got to say, if you tell that to any 19-year-old, they're going to run with it, or many of them will run with it. And I was very excited to know that I had the power, but I didn't know what that meant. So I graduated college, and I kept listening to Blue all through college. But when I graduated, I left the city that he lived in, and I moved back a few years later and found out that he had a storytelling open mic. And this was before The Moth. This was before pretty much anyone was doing things like this. This was in the early 1990s. So I went to the open mic and I told a story. I was petrified. My knees were shaking. You know, you remember that feeling of barely being able to stand because you're so nervous. But I told a story. And by the end of telling that, I knew that this was something I'd be doing for the rest of my life, though I didn't know how. I was 23, I think, when that happened, and I'm 57 now. So I kept going to blues things. I found other storytelling venues. There were conferences. I started doing everything I could. I started teaching a few years later, and that was it. And I've been fully self-employed as a working artist for almost 20 years now, making a living as a storyteller.
Oh, that's such a great story.
Thank you. Thank
Yeah,
you.
I
And it's
love that.
branded. I coach, I do organizational work, I do all kinds of things now, but that's where it started. In
Yeah.
that moment of awe at what he was doing with King Lear. It was incredible.
Mm. So did you ever go down the Shakespeare line yourself, or you?
I've done some Shakespeare. I've done some first person tellings of Shakespeare characters, usually women. Um, I have a Lady Macbeth that's a lot of fun to tell. I have a Titania that I really enjoy.
Mm.
So I do these first person narratives of the characters. I don't have, I certainly don't have Blue's sense of rhythm, and I'm not really a memorizer, so I don't tend to memorize the text per se. So I've done a little Shakespeare, but not very much. But every time I do, I think about Blue.
Yeah. Oh, that's wonderful. And so would you consider Blue to be like a mentor for you in that way?
Blue, Blue was my mentor. He was my father in some very meaningful ways. He and I became very close. I became very close with his wife as well. Blue had a lot of adopted sons. He and his wife never had biological children, but he had many men whom he claimed as sons. And I am one of only two women that I know of who he claimed as daughters. I was one of his
Mm.
baby girls. And I didn't even know about the other one until a few years ago when she said, "Hey, we're sisters." And it was really good to find out. Um, and so we were really close for the rest of his life. And I was very close with his wife, Ruth Hill, who is a scholar in her own right. And I was there when he died. Um,
Mm.
and I took care of Ruth after his death until I left that part of the country. And then a very dear friend took over her care, and she actually died just a little more than a year ago.
Mm.
Um, Blue died in 2009. So they were my family. They were family, and yeah, I learned a lot from each of them. Not necessarily about storytelling performance. Blue was not someone who taught in really structured ways. He taught by example.
Mm.
Um, so what I really learned from them was about life and how to live fully and authentically, and to, when I was younger, be less afraid, and as I grew older, to learn to not be afraid of doing things that people might not like, of trying to do art that was absolutely authentic to me and sometimes challenging because we are all challenging sometimes. Um, I learned an enormous amount about listening from both of them by watching them listen. There are lots and lots of stories about Blue listening and it saving people's lives, quite literally. Um, so yeah, they were as much my parents as my parents were my
Mm.
parents.
What a rich
So
upbringing to have. You got your birth parents and this, adoptive sort of it's like it really is like seems very destined for you to be in this space with story because of those early beginnings, isn't it? I think, when we when I came across story, it had been a forgotten thing. I didn't realize that people could do it for a job because lived in this little bubble of, well, you'd be teachers, doctors, nurses. You had no idea that it could be a profession. So tell me about your professional life. What sort of work are you doing or have you done? Yeah, and with who?
sure. I do a pretty broad range of things. I think a lot of us who are making our living as working artists do a broad range of things. So I perform mostly for adults, some for families. Um, I tell a wide range of stories, ranging from personal narrative to pretty traditional tellings of folk tales and myths, to retold folk tales and myths, these first person tellings, for example, or otherwise radically retold. Original fiction, I do a little bit of historical performance, though not much. I teach, and I teach on a broad range of topics. I coach. I coach mostly people. Most of my coaching clients are people with whom I end up developing long-term coaching relationships with. Many of them are people who want to work on difficult material or
Mm.
material that is challenging for them. Um, I am really committed to being having as much integrity in coaching as I can, which means that if someone comes to me and says, I want to work with you on memorizing lines for a stage play, then I will recommend someone else as an example. I try and work with people in the things that I know I'm best at and be comfortable referring people out.
Mm.
I teach, as I said, on a wide range of topics, workshops, retreats, in the classroom. And I also do consulting work with organizations around how they can use storytelling to be more effective in their training, their recruitment, to have a more positive impact in the world. And my secret agenda, whenever I do consulting work with an organization, is really to get them to be more effective listeners at all levels, whether I'm working with executives or people on the line in a factory or whatever it may be, getting them to really learn how to listen to each other and how to care about what they hear about. Because ultimately, I think that what I'm doing, and I think what all of us, many of us are doing in the storytelling world, is we are empathy practitioners. Our job is to help people connect with the parts of themselves that can be the most profoundly authentic, profoundly empathetic, and use that as a way to build bridges so we might be a little kinder to each other. I mean, I think that's what we're really doing. So,
Yeah, that's so beautiful. I've got tears in my eyes. Um, I'd love to hear more about this corporate stuff. How do you approach that? How do you start approaching an organization, for example?
sure. Well, I'm gonna take a step back from that actually and tell you how I started doing organizational work,
Mm.
because that informs everything that came after. Um, in the late 1990s, early 2000s, it was before September 11th, 2001. So the late 1990s, I had a friend call me, and she said that in her workplace, women were having trouble being heard. That she worked for NASA, and in NASA at the time, the culture was such that engineers were placed on the highest pedestal, and the engineer who was loud enough would be the one who would get the most accolade and the most
Mm.
work and the most interesting problems to solve. And there's certainly many women engineers who are extraordinary. However, women's communication styles often do not lead us to being really effective in a room where the loudest voice wins.
Mm.
And I think that's a pretty good thing, actually. I'd rather be with people who aren't shouting. But she wanted me to come in and teach these women in her team how to be heard. And I said, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know how to do that. I tell stories and I teach people how to tell stories. And she said, yes, you tell stories and you teach people how to tell stories. I believe you can do it. And her saying to me, I believe you can do this, please come help us, changed everything. So I thought and thought and thought and thought and came up with a bunch of stuff and went and worked with these women. And then word spread around NASA that I was doing these workshops, and I started working with women all around NASA. And I worked with NASA for about a decade teaching workshops for women. But it started with that phone call. Um, and the first time I did this work, I was really nervous. But then as I did it, I realized that it was a perfect fit for me, because I have this, I never remember if it's the left brain or the right brain that's the rational one and which is the imaginative one. So one side of my brain, the imaginative side, is really imaginative and really good at coming up with images and sensory detail and dreams and all of that. But I'm also rather scientifically minded. I like science. I'm fascinated by it. I could spend our entire call talking about the neurology of storytelling very happily. But it doesn't always fit into the storytelling world, to the art world. And art doesn't always fit in really well in the organizational world. And going into organizations, teaching people how to tell stories, how to be better listeners, how to extract data from the stories they collect through good listening, and then what to do with that data, marries the right and left sides of my brain like nothing else in my experience. So I get to really use all the different ways that I am smart We all have different ways that we're smart, but this way I get to use a bunch of them all at once. So when I was at NASA, I realized that this was a really good fit for me because it allowed me to do all these things. So after I left, I did what I often do when I'm trying to come up with a path through things. I came up with a list of possible workshops I could teach, and it was only the titles. I made up, 5, 10 titles of workshops, having no idea how to do them. And then I started thinking about how would I actually do this? Can I legitimately do this with integrity? Can I do this in a way where I'm not just trying to sell somebody something? And once I had 3 or 4 that I thought were really solid, that I thought I would want to do, I settled on working on storytelling with nonprofits initially, because nonprofits get that stories matter. They may just not always be really good at using them, especially nonprofits that have to do a lot of fundraising and have fundraising efforts, not merely through grants, but directed at individuals. So I started doing these free storytelling for nonprofits workshops. And I'm giving away the barn here. If someone else wants to do this, it worked. So don't do exactly what I did, whoever's thinking about doing this, but do it. Come up with these ideas and then workshop them by giving it to people who you think are good people. So I called up nonprofits, usually someplace where I knew someone who worked there or used their services, but I called these nonprofits that I believed in. So children's literacy and feeding people and women's health and all that kind of stuff. And I said, hey, I'm working on this. I would like to do this with you. And most of them, were skeptical. Some of them thought it was great. It gave me a chance to workshop things. And then I started going to conferences and doing presentations at conferences and on different things. I went to a bunch of tech conferences because I'm pretty good at speaking tech language, and other things, and doing workshops on storytelling for blank, whatever the field was that the conference was in. It's a big investment because you don't get paid to go to these conferences. You usually still have to pay to go, and there's your travel and your housing and your food. But out of those, I collected mailing lists. I asked people to sign up, give me your email, and I'll send you this neat little idea about organizational storytelling, and what it was varied. It eventually grew into something that I call the 5 critical organizational stories. And that helped me develop a list. And then I started writing to people, and I started a newsletter, and then people started hiring me. So it took a while, and it was not as smooth a process as I'm describing by any means. There were mistakes and fits and starts, and some really embarrassing mistakes as well. But I kept at it because I love performing. I love telling stories. I love coaching. I love teaching. And I equally love this work that allows me to go in and give people tools they'll use, give them a chance to be fully human at work, and gets them to listen to each other. So they might have a little more empathy for each other. They might be able to treat each other a little more kindly. They might be able to see the human side of their work more thoroughly. So that's the organizational stuff.
Yeah, wow. So do you use folk, fairy tale, and myth in those spaces?
Folktales in those spaces? Sometimes. It depends on the organization. Some organizations are very clear that they want me to come in and do, the one I get hired for the most is marketing, storytelling and marketing, which is, I can do it and it's effective, but it's in some ways the least interesting for me. And it's where my secret agenda is the most important to implement. In that, no, not so much, because that's really about teaching people how to listen well and tell stories that respond to the client's needs. But when it's things like storytelling for onboarding or around culture change, especially around culture change, then I can use traditional material. The Blind Men and the Elephant is a really good one. Do you know that story? You must know that story. You know a version of this story, I'm sure of it. The story might come from, there are versions from India, there are versions from Asia. that to tell it compactly, there are 3, 5, 7 blind men who live in a village, and they help each other and take care of each other, and they've done so for a long time. And one day someone brings an elephant to the village, and no one there has ever seen an elephant, and the blind men want to experience the elephant. So they each go up to it and feel a different part of the elephant. The one feels the trunk and says, "Oh, an elephant's like a pipe." And one feels the side. "Oh, an elephant's like a wall." And one feels the tail. "Oh, an elephant's like a rope." You can end the story there. You can continue the story where they get into a fight and their friendship is broken, and then they each have to fend for themselves, which is really effective to use in an organization with big issues. Or you can take it a step further and say they get into a fight and have to fend for themselves and then forgive each other and find a way to help each other again. So that's one that I use a lot. There are other stories that I might use. The trick is that they need to be very quick. They need to be short and 3 or 4 minutes, because otherwise somebody in the audience will cross their arms and furrow their brows and say something about how, "Why are you telling us these kids' stories? This isn't going to help." But if you can keep them really short, you can usually catch people and get them interested. The Brementown Musicians is one that I use, especially with startups, quick startups. There are others that I'll use as well.
Yeah, great. So do you have a preference for the type of stories you tell and also the audiences that you tell in?
Yes and no. It depends. This is not going to be a helpful answer. My favorite story is the one I just told. I mean, that's snarky, but I'm sure you've heard that from other people as well. I really love traditional material. I love folk and fairy tales because there is so much depth and meaning in there. That's really there are big life lessons in many of those stories. I'm actually working on putting together a show here in the States on anti-fascist fairy tales, about telling traditional stories that are a playbook for how to survive when you are when you have an oppressive government. Wonder why I'm telling that. But so traditional material. I love retelling those stories because then I can dive deeply into the characters. I really love characters, and see who they are, and how they relate to modern life. I love some of the original fiction I tell. I have a series of stories called The Adventures of Crazy Jane and Red-Haired Annie, which are Crazy Jane is a holy fool, and Red-Haired Annie is her friend, who's the one who kind of tethers Crazy Jane. And they are not quite fairy tales, and they're not quite modern stories. They're set a little bit in between. Those are probably the best of the original work that I've done. I enjoy telling personal stories sometimes, not always. And as for audiences, it isn't a type of person, but when the audience is engaged and interested and willing to play with me a little bit, so we can have a little bit of improvisational moments or a little bit of really breaking the fourth wall. That's my favorite kind of audience. But storytelling audiences are like that, they get it. They want to be there with you. So most audiences I really enjoy. I don't work with really little kids very often. I can do it, but I have a number of colleagues who are so much better at it than I am that I'll recommend them. But anyone, I don't know, 9 or 10 or up usually is delightful.
I'm quite interested in these, your original stories. Did you tell them and then go, "Oh, that's a really good story," or did you write them and then tell them? What was your process with those?
My process with everything is that I tell it first. Nothing gets written down until it's been told some number of times. Sometimes I might write down an outline if it's a long story. But with the Crazy Jane stories in particular, it's when Brother Blue had his open mic, And every other week I'd go there and I'd want to tell a new story. So I stood up. I had this idea for Crazy Jane, the name borrowed from Yeats, and her friend, red haired Annie, who just popped into my head, and about them having an adventure to rescue a stolen child from the Fairy Queen. So I had this idea and I knew where it started and I knew where it ended. And I had a couple of images in between, and the rest was just getting up and telling it. And that's the way most of them are. Most of them are. If it's the most recent Crazy Jane story, is about an hour long. It's one story that's close to an hour. And with that one, I talked it through to my spouse, but it wasn't telling it. It was, okay, so this happens and that happens and then that happens. It took me 7 or 8 minutes to talk it through with him, and then I wrote down the ideas, and then I told it, and it turned into a 60-minute story.
Wow.
Yeah, I
Did
love doing
you?
that.
Yeah.
I
Because
love
I
just
was
letting.
experimenting with making up stuff on the spot last week, and I just, yeah, I wondered, how much structure you have before you begin with that, and how much fun it is to make stuff up, like a complete story up as you're going. Um, yeah, amazing. So this podcast is called The Heart of Storytelling. What do you think is at the heart of storytelling?
Connection, connection and empathy.
Mm.
Um, it's listening to one another because the teller listens to the audience as well. Um, it's finding that place where we all can be delighted or enchanted or moved. And me as a teller, opening myself up and saying, look, here's my heart. It's kind
Mm.
of messy. And here's a story from my heart. And the audience saying, oh, her heart looks kind of like my heart. Even if I'm telling a story that has nothing to do with hearts, even if it's just some silly, funny story.
Mm.
It's about that connection. I don't know a single teller who hasn't experienced it, that you're in front of the audience and for me, it's almost like this physical shock or a snap where all of a sudden we are all breathing the same. That's that's why I do this. And it happens when teaching sometimes, it happens when consulting, it has to happen in coaching or the relationship doesn't last. It's about giving people space to be their most authentic self in that moment and to be witnessed doing so by someone who just goes, wow. So if I'm the teller, it's about getting that moment for me. More often these days when I'm teaching or coaching or consulting, it's about creating a space where people can have that moment and recognize that there is value that we all carry, even if it's in a metaphor.
Well, metaphor is very powerful, isn't it? As a means to drop any divisions between us.
Hmm.
Yeah, really, really powerful. So I imagine over from being a little girl listening and then telling stories to now, you've learned a lot. Um, and I came across you during COVID years doing some online storytelling, and I think it was you're up to day 200 or something like that. And I was saying, oh, this is so exciting. Oh, the Turnip Princess, where is this book? I want it right now.
I love that book. I
So
love that book.
yeah, it's so good. So, tell me about this your own personal development that you've had, and also where do you think storytelling will be in the future?
So, personally, storytelling, I've been doing this for close to 35 years, um, and longer if you count the stuff from when I was a kid. So, I can't really understand who I might be were I not doing this. I know that storytelling has consistently drives me to try and do better. My love for the art drives me to try and do better. So it has given me ambition that I don't think I would have had otherwise, quite honestly. Um, and not ambition in terms of being on stage X or Y, but being better at the craft. and knowing that there are always ways to be better at the craft. It has given me ethics around listening and care and acceptance, and boundaries, some really good ones around boundaries. I have some stories that are pretty raw and people always want to want to know more, and they don't get to know more. I get to say, that's what I'm going to tell you. So in terms of personal development, it's I mean, I met my first husband through storytelling. And then when he died, his death became, and our relationship became, part of the stories that I tell. In the second half, please remind me of the second half of that question.
So where do you think
Where it's
we're going?
Yeah. It's not going away. So often when I tell someone I'm a storyteller outside of the storytelling world, they say, "Oh, it's a dying art form, don't you think?" To which my answer is a resounding no. One, humans are storytelling animals. This is what we do. It's what we've been doing for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. It's not going away. The ways that we share those stories will continue to evolve, but oral storytelling, person to person, over the kitchen table, at bedtime, in theaters and stages and festivals, that is not going away. The festival scene may change, but that doesn't mean that we're going to stop telling stories in a performative way. I think we're going to see some more really interesting stuff with short form video. I mean, TikTok has changed how a lot of this stuff happens. But I think we're also going to see more and more people sitting down and telling each other stories. Again, maybe not in a performative way, not once upon a time, but let me tell you about this thing that happened when I was a kid. Because the more separated from each other we become, and I think in many ways technology is simultaneously separating and uniting, right? So you and I are looking at each other through a screen. Listeners, you're hearing this through some kind of device that simultaneously brings us closer and separates us, because it's not happening in the same space, and we can't watch each other's full bodies and catch the nuances of breath. But technology is going to create more and more interesting ways to do it. And when we see someone tell a story on a screen, I think that's going to make more and more people say, I want more of that. This little feeling that I have, how do I get more of it? And the way you get more of it is by actually being in the same room. So I think it's so fundamental to who we are. It's not going away. And I think it's just going to get more interesting.
Oh, what a lovely answer. So I'm going to just throw, I haven't asked anybody this question before, but in Australia, we have conversations about cultural appropriation, and you seem like a good person who can answer this question around telling traditional tales if you're not from that place. What's your wisdom on that?
I don't know that I have wisdom. I know that I have a lot of thoughts about it. We are having that conversation in the States as well, because the indigenous populations here in the United States, I think with real justification, are saying, stop telling our sacred stories. Those are ours. I can tell you my personal ethics around it, and then I'll tell you a little bit of what I say in classes around it. So on a personal level, I try not to tell stories from people who have been badly hurt, and especially are continuing to be badly hurt by people who look like me. So for me, and again, it's only for me, that means that I don't tell Indigenous American stories. I don't tell Indigenous Australian stories. I don't tell any African American stories. I tell a few stories from the African subcontinent. And so on and so forth. I try and make the decision for each story as I come across it. And the question that I ask myself, if I come across a story from a culture where the people have been badly hurt by people who look like me, and the culture still exists especially, and we continue to hurt them, is, why do I need to tell this story? Go find another one. So, for example, there was a time when I felt profoundly called to tell the story of Sedna, which is one of the formative stories for some of the people who live up in the Arctic and subarctic. Um, and I knew that I couldn't. And I really, 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 really wanted to. So I did some work on why I wanted to tell that story and found some other stories. And then I sent some money to a school that was full of kids, Indigenous kids, so that the teacher could buy copies of Sedna and do a unit on it. Um, so that's my answer for me. My answer in classes is I cannot tell you what to do. You need to make up your own mind. However, I would invite you to think about how it would feel if someone took the most sacred story of your life, not necessarily of your culture, maybe it's even a story you don't tell, and if they were to tell that story without understanding everything behind it, how would you feel? And that creates a little bit of empathy around it. If someone really needs to tell a story that is appropriative, then I will ask them at least to do really thorough research on it and understand the context. So that's how I handle that.
No, that's a really considered approach. I like the boundaries that you've put in place for yourself as well, to say, well, I'm not going to go there. I think that's really healthy. Yeah, and I often wonder about the line between appropriation and appreciation as well, and where is that line between,
I struggle with it.
yeah, it is a really tricky balance to have.
Mhm.
Um,
I have to say, Alyssa, you are a superb listener. You really are. Thank you. Yeah.
that's all right, thank you. Um, well, I guess yeah, I just don't know. I don't know where that line is. Do you have a particular?
I don't either. I
No.
mean, this is the unfortunate answer is that's why I set up those boundaries for myself.
Mm.
Um, but I also know that I need to trust my gut and ask myself, so I really love this story. Really loving the story, does that mean I have to tell, do I have to tell it? Is it just that I love the story, or do I really have to tell it? And I ask myself that question a lot. Um, I also I also realize that cultural appropriation can be taken to ridiculous extremes. Now, for me, were I to only tell the stories that are of my heritage, I'd have all of Eastern Europe and Russia. So, I've got a lot covered. I'd have all the Grimm stories. I actually know some Grimm stories that my mother learned from her mother. So I know some of the stories that were collected by the Grimms from the oral tradition. But the whole, I read a lot of stories I'll never tell. I own dozens of stories of Indigenous American books of Indigenous American stories. So I don't have a good answer for that except to say, ask yourself why this story, and learn as much of the context around it as you can if you
Mm.
feel like you really must tell it.
Yeah, that's great advice. I really like that. So imagine over 35 years, plus your bedtime stories, you've had lots of wonderful moments with people. Do you have any standout moments that in storytelling that you've had?
Yeah. Yeah, this is a big example. And this ties in with the question of appropriation. So it's an interesting layover here. I have an original story that called Coyote on the Bridge. And I came up with this story when I had been telling stories at Blues Open Mic and at other places for about 5 years. And the gist of the story, it's a first person narration, opens with the speaker being suicidal and about to throw themselves off a bridge. And this guy comes and says, "Hey, what are you doing? Don't do that." And he jumps in the water. "Come on in, the water's fine," and then starts to drown. And so the speaker has to jump in and save him. And then the man says, "I have something I want to show you," and leads her on this walk through the city. in the middle of the night. And so there's this long descriptive section of what that is like. And they end up underneath an overpass where the city's unhoused, uncared for population is there, basically kind of having a party. And she watches this, and some things happen that suggest that the man may or may not be Coyote, the American indigenous trickster figure. And at the end of the story, she goes home and she knows she'll be okay. And it ends with, but even now, sometimes hang on a sec, I have to remember it. I don't tell it anymore because of appropriation reasons. Even now, years later, I will sometimes wake up in the middle of the night and I'll feel it creeping under my fingernails, wrapping around my legs, and I will think, no, I can't do that again. I can't be in that darkness. And I stop and I listen and I hear him, Coyote, laughing and howling, singing me back to sleep. So that's the end of the story. I'll circle back to the appropriation issue. Well, I've been telling that story for a long time. And it got to a point, and almost every time I would tell that story, someone would come up to me and would say, I didn't know anyone else ever felt that way. And it got to a point where I was carrying the number for the suicide prevention hotline with me. If I knew I was going to tell it, I'd write that number down. Well, about 5 or 6 years ago, I got a letter from a suicide prevention organization telling me that a substantial donation had been made in my name. And I didn't know anything about this. So I got in touch with them and I said, what is this about? And they said, somebody gave us money. It's pretty obvious. And I said, could you contact the person who did this and tell them that if they'd like, I would like to thank them personally. And a few weeks after that, I got a call from this woman who had made the donation. And apparently some years ago, her son had been at one of my concerts. She'd taken him. And I told that story. And afterwards, he told her that he was planning on killing himself that night. And he didn't. She was able to get him help. And he lived and he went on to get married and he had grandchildren. And she hadn't stopped thinking about me all those years. And so she considered me the reason that her son was still alive. So that's a story of some pretty big impact. Other stories, I met my first husband through storytelling, as I said. I've had people tell me that their stories changed their lives. I've had students go on to become exceptional storytellers who have done incredible things. It's amazing. The appropriation section, what I ended up doing once I learned about cultural appropriation, which I didn't know about when I first crafted that story, and I picked Coyote because I live in the United States, is I actually went and talked to elders in a number of indigenous nations where Coyote is part of their pantheon, and asked them what they thought. And actually to a person, they said, oh, he gave you that story. You should tell that story. So on the rare occasions when I do tell it now, I include that part of it. But I don't tell it very often now. And I miss it, but I can't quite do it comfortably.
No, but such an impact I mean, I've got a similar experience, not telling a story, but showing someone I care about them on the day that they were going to do that. So, you just don't know what's going on in someone's head, and the impact that the story will have is quite significant. Yeah. I just want to do a quick dive back into the COVID thing. Were you doing the Zooms before COVID, or was that
occasionally?
Yeah.
I would occasionally do it with coaching clients who are far away, or take meetings or things like that, but nothing significant. I wasn't doing concerts over Zoom. I wasn't doing teaching over Zoom, and now easily half of what I do, if not more, post-COVID takes place on Zoom. And during COVID, of course, everything did.
Yeah. So how are you finding the platform?
Working on Zoom, you mean?
Yeah.
Uh, Now that I do live work occasionally, it feels lacking.
Mm.
You know, the as I said earlier, the strength of that connection is most profound when we're in the same space together.
Mm.
However, I still love it because it gives me an opportunity to talk to you. Or I did some work recently with Feast. I did a mentorship, the festival, the Federation of East Asian Storytelling. I did a mentorship there on personal stories, or talking to my friend who lives in Maine or who whatever it is. I
Mm.
think it's amazing that we can do this. So yeah, it's not the same, but it's a heck of a lot better than not doing it, right?
Absolutely. So, do you have any advice for storytellers who might be interested in either starting up or working with corporations or working, I don't know, in any aspect that we've talked about? Yeah.
Yeah. So, organizational storytelling, I'll start with that. I have a lot of people ask me about that because the impression is that you can make a lot of money with it. There are some times when I make a lot of money with it, and a lot more times when I don't because I still
Mm.
work with a lot of nonprofits. Um, but don't do it unless you're interested in it.
Mm.
Um, with the organizational work, don't think that it's going to be a quick path to making, doubling your income or something, because it isn't. Um, if you are interested in doing it, then think about how you will take all of these amazing things that you know and make them digestible for people who may live very differently than you do. So think about um, how you can become subversive with it. So, for instance, when I go to an organization, I wear a suit and I do my best to make sure that my hair is tidy, which takes a lot of work and is very challenging because I don't want people to be distracted by that weird lady over there with the funny hair wearing that dress that no one would ever wear to work. I put on a costume because it gives people a way to take me seriously.
Yeah.
So do it because you're interested in it and meet them where they are instead of asking them to meet you.
Mm.
And it'll be much more effective. It doesn't mean you're not telling them the same things, but you're just giving them a way to open the door.
Mm.
For people starting it, um, the best, it's like cooking, right? You can read a million recipes and not know how to cook. The best way to be a storyteller is to tell stories, and you're going to make mistakes. Forgive yourself when you do. I still make mistakes. We all still make mistakes. And say, wonder why that happened, and figure out
Mm.
how to make a different mistake next time. Get listened to by people who love you and who will tell you the things that they love about what you just did. Not by, ask people to tell you what worked because you
Mm.
will know what didn't work.
Mm.
Let people tell you that you did not stink so that the voices in your head that say you did, so they'll shut up a little and keep going.
Well, they're great
So that's,
pieces of advice.
yeah.
Great pieces of advice. So you've been amazing, Laura. I've learned a lot from you today, and it really is special to hear some of your stories. I really enjoyed hearing everything. Actually, I look forward to re-listening to it when I can edit. But thank you so much. So where can people find you if they want to find out more about you and the work that you do?
Yeah, thank you. And let me just say, Alyssa, this has been lovely. You are a wonderful listener and you ask great questions, and I appreciate this time. So you can find out more about me at laurapacker.com, laurapacker.com. If you are really intrigued by what I do, you can support me on Patreon, which, for those of you who may not know, it's a service where you give a little bit of money each month to an artist whose work you like, and you get stuff from them. So you can find me at patreon.com/Laura Packer. And you can go to facebook.com/Laura Packer Storyteller for my professional page, where I usually remember to put updates about the things that I'm doing there. You can sign up for my mailing list on my website as well at laurapacker.com. So that's it.
Amazing. Yeah, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Alyssa. You're doing wonderful work. Thank you for doing this.
If you've enjoyed the podcast and would like to support me to continue the work that I'm doing, please head to buymeacoffee/Alyssa Curtain and make a donation or sign up for a subscription. This is a passion project, and as such, it is voluntary. So your donations make it easier for me to continue this work. Thank you for your support. Well, that's our episode for today. I hope you've enjoyed learning about storytelling and folktale, fairytale, myth, legend, or personal tales, wonder tales, all sorts of stories, and the art of storytelling and why we really need to continue using it today. You can find more information about me at alyssacurtain.com or at Alyssa Curtain Stories on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube and TikTok. I hope that you can find your heart in storytelling.